Hunting Season by Dr. Rockhard. Part 4. Chapter 7. The Beast. Adira shut herself off in her room, rocking back and forth on the bathroom floor. She tried hard not to think about Conrad being brutally ripped to pieces, but the evidence was all there. She took one look at his fractured, battered skull, and the traumatic memory was planted. She had experienced panic attacks from time to time in her life, and right now one was threatening to overflow her. She had to keep calm, but when the one you love wasn't around to help you calm down, what could you do? She could vividly hear Conrad's screams for the millionth time as he was being torn apart before her very eyes once more. Why did he separate himself from Mitch and Kevin? She had this image in her mind where they were all together and okay. Could she have been wrong about other things as well? Her underarms started to sweat too much. She looked at the watch on her wrist, 11:53 at night. Has she really stayed inside all day? Adira didn't care about what Jane had told her. It's not like whatever was scary came out directly at 12. She needed air. With all her might, she pushed open the hard wooden door and made her way outside into the cold night. It felt good, and her nerves relaxed for a moment. She closed her eyes, breathing in deeply as her negative thoughts started to fade away. No one was outside, of course. The fire they had made earlier was nothing but an old pile of ash. She paused for a moment, taking in the fresh wind that blew softly against her clothes. She remembered there was an old wooden bench next to the playground. Adira could vaguely make it out from where she was, but she thought she could see its outline from there. Tiptoeing, Adira carefully made her way past the occupied cabins. She wondered if Jane was watching from her window, paranoid as ever. The woman seemed to know more about survival than anyone there. Maybe that was why Jax turned to her for guidance. Adira came to a screeching halt the second a very loud crack erupted directly ahead of her. She paused, large eyes resting on the bench, and what was beside it? It was too dark to make out the shape, but she could have sworn it was a deer sitting down or something of the sort. Adira wrapped her eyes roughly, blinking rapidly as she tried to make out what she was looking at. It was gone by the time she opened her eyes again. Was it really just her imagination? How could something so vivid appear before her? Was she going insane? She laid her hand over her chest, thoughts going back to the locket she had lost. Her grip tightened on her shirt as she angrily turned away from the playground and started to march back to her room. She was an idiot. It was her fault her items were gone. Her fault Mitch's most precious gift was gone. She started to blame herself for his disappearance as well. If she wasn't working that day, he wouldn't have gone to the forest. They would have spent the night together, cuddled under warm blankets while they watched movies. Mitch. Adira buried her face into her palms, his blue, puppy-like eyes taking over her mind. His sweet smile, kind words, endless support. If he was dead, so was she. She wouldn't leave anymore. There were two reasons why Adira bought a gun: to defend herself or kill herself. If she found him like she found Conrad, well, life just wasn't worth living. People would call her overdramatic, but when your depressing world changes for the better because of someone and they disappear, Only those who experienced such a tragedy would understand the never-ending pain. Please, Mitch, Adira thought to herself as she dried her tears and entered her cabin. Please be safe. She turned to lock the door and lifted her gaze, frozen at the unexpected sight. From the other side of camp, back where the playground was, stood an abnormally tall figure. By the build it had to be a man, only it was covered in darkness, like black paint had been thrown all over his body. His fingers seemed long, and what made matters worse was the fact that he had two deer-like horns on his head. She could faintly make out what appeared to be red glowing eyes, watching her with utmost concentration. Adira refused to blink, now more convinced than ever she wasn't hallucinating. She slowly began to shut the door, but the second it silently crouched down, she slammed it shut. The woman breathed heavily as she locked it with fumbling hands, making sure the window blinds were shut as she turned off the lights she had left on. Her heart beat fast as her mind raced back to the rumors people were saying about the beast in Whispering Winds. An experiment, an alien, a monster. Monsters didn't exist. It must have been a deer. They sometimes stood on their legs and walked around. She saw it before. Holding her breath, Adira peered through the blinds, relieved to find that whatever that thing was gone. After checking the lock a few times, she nervously made her way back to bed and forced herself to fall asleep. It was only day 3 in Whispering Winds, and she was already losing her mind. Chapter 8. Stalked. Adira stared at the floor as the horrifying screams of a woman entered her ears. She tried to block out the sorrowful weeping, only looking up when she thought the order was done. Another body was found, and this time it was someone her next-door cabin mate knew. Adira wanted to comfort her, but Devon was already doing so. She patted the woman's damp head, taking her hand in hers as they both sat on the ground. Jane looked on at the sea of trees with a stern face, seemingly blocking out the sad event behind her. Adira slowly made her way to the woman, giving a weak smile as she exchanged a small greeting. She wanted to tell her about what she had seen last night, but it didn't seem appropriate at a time like that. "What's on your mind?" Jane asked, never taking her eyes away from nature. Adira shrugged, shaking her head as she tried to come up with something other than the creepy humanoid thing. "I'm just wondering what's going to happen to her now. Her work is done here. She'll return back home with the body and Jax will contact the authorities again." "So Conrad's parents must know he's dead." She couldn't imagine what they were feeling at that moment. Jane nodded silently, facing the other now. "You hungry? We got a restock of pancakes in the kitchen." Adira smiled softly, shaking her head. "Maybe later. I need fresh air." Jane watched as the young woman started to walk away from her. "Not too far." Adira nodded and said farewell, leaving behind the sound of sobs. She made sure to bring her pocket knife as well as some spare strings this time. She attached it to a pole at the entrance of camp and started to walk up and away into the trees. She had no idea what she was doing or where she was going. All she wanted was peace and quiet, a moment to get rid of the cries. Adira rested her shoulder against the bark, squeezing her eyes shut as she leaned the side of her head on the rough surface. She stayed there for a while, smiling to herself as happy thoughts started to pop up. In her mind, she was manifesting a scenario where she found Mitch and Kevin. The both of them a little dirty and skinny, but alive and happy to see her. She imagined hugging Mitch again, kissing him, seeing him smile once more. A fierce hot wind blew against the back of her neck, causing the hair on her arms to stand straight up. She kept her eyes shut, afraid to even breathe as she realized she was at the mercy of a wild animal. It was so close. She could feel its strange and heavy breathing. It had to be a bear, but how in the world was she going to escape with all her limbs? As if in cue, the animal suddenly rubbed its curved paw on her shoulder, which made Adira more terrified now that she realized what it really was. She opened her eyes, turning her head ever so slightly to see a humanish-looking hand with dangerous claws that threatened to penetrate through her clothes. The unnaturally smooth skin had no wrinkles and was pitch black. She felt like she was looking at a night sky with no stars. "Please," she found herself speaking like the idiot she was. "Please don't hurt me." By the wet line of what could only be drool dripping down her neck, she knew she was dinner. With all her might, she launched herself away from the beast and started to run with the string still in grip. The most deafening, horrifying screech erupted behind her as the sound of stomping and awful whispers started to catch up. Adira screamed as well, more afraid than she had ever been in her entire life. Her heart was beating at such an awful speed, she felt her whole chest would explode. Like the idiot she was, her shaking hands lost grip of the string she was using as guidance back to camp. There was no point in looking for it now. She had to improvise, or that thing would eat her the second she stopped. Adira made a sharp right and jumped off a small hill, rolling her ankle by accident. The thing didn't seem to be too close, so she scrambled underneath a couple of boulders, aligned like a hat, and stayed put, covering her mouth. Her ankle pulsed angrily, but she ignored its cries of agony. There was a deafening silence, except for her heartbeat, which pounded ferociously inside her head. Whatever had caught sight of her last night was definitely the thing that was chasing her now. It must have been stalking her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But why her? And besides that, what even was it? It looked somewhat human, but there was no way it was. She wondered if anyone else back in camp knew about it, and the danger they were all in. Footsteps could suddenly be heard, causing Adira to jerk her head around. She looked through a small crack in her hideout, noticing that it was a human walking. She could see a faint black jacket, but the popped-up collar was covering his face. She couldn't let them fall prey to the beast out there, and so she decided to get their attention. The steps got closer as she shimmied her way closer to the exit of the boulders, only to be met with a pair of dirty, loose black pants tucked into a pair of equally untidy boots. She paused, and so did the person, their shoes facing the entrance of her enclosure. She couldn't tell anything else about them, or what they looked like just yet. "I'm human. I was hiding from something." Adira carefully worded her explanation, hoping not to scare whoever the individual was. The person slowly started to crouch down, and it was then she noticed the hands, then the head. There was no distinguishable nose, mouth, or ears, just a massive black gaping face of darkness that threatened to expose her deepest nightmares and fears. His eyes burned bright red, however with a hunger that made Adira holler in despair. The monster reached in and yanked Adira by her wrists as she thrashed about wildly. The grip was rough and unnaturally strong. She knew there was no way she could escape from this. "Somebody help me!" Adira sobbed like she hadn't sobbed in months. She knew she had failed Mitch. Now no one else would look for him. Everyone thought he was dead. She was the only one who never gave up hope, and now she was going to die. "Mitch!" the young woman shouted, causing the beast to pause and dangle her in front of him. He cocked his horn head like a dog the more she cried. "Mitch, help me!" Adira begged repeatedly for a miracle from God. She felt her pants begin to moisten, but at a time like that peeing yourself was the least of your worries. By some strange chance, the monster let her go. She fell to the floor and on her ankle again, causing it to burn once more. It didn't stop her from pouncing back up, eager to hobble away. It appeared she didn't have to, however. That thing was gone, like it had never been there to begin with. She struggled to regain composure and breathe properly. Once a little bit of her sanity was restored, she started to make her way up the little hill she had jumped off of. Straight from there, she would find her camp again. The others had to know what had just happened. None of them were safe. Thank you for listening to Part 4 of A Hunting Season by Dr. Rockhard.